Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Ethan Halfide with the Customer Discovercast. I am here today with Jarie Bolander. Jarie, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
I love your background, man. We spoke about it a little bit offline, but man, tell the people about what went into kind of the poster selection there.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're watching this on video, there's my buddy did this awesome background because I also have a podcast called the Entrepreneur Ethos, which is based on the book that I wrote, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you can see, I've got Warren Buffett, Pulp Fiction, and the crazy uncle of podcasting, Mr. Joe Rogan in the house, the powerful Joe
You
Rogan.
made it the decisive title. He's the drunk uncle.
Well, we talked about that before, right? Is he the grandfather? I think Adam Curry maybe is the grandfather. So he's the crazy drunk uncle. So I think he'll like that.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's where to start in terms of the journey as an entrepreneur and all
Yeah,
what we're
man.
talking
Let's
about.
Uh, well, little insight. I want to give Jari kind of the floor here. I want him to really go in depth. He's written, I think, 6 books, right?
Yeah, I
And
have.
he's
Yeah.
worked for 6 different startups. You're an engineer by education and an
Right.
entrepreneur by nature.
Right.
So I wanted to
Exactly.
get that correct. So
Yeah.
tell the people about what that means. Your background a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, I went to school to get a degree in electrical engineering. I spent the first part of my career hopping around to different startups in Silicon Valley as a semiconductor design engineer, product engineer, like semiconductor physics. So, the chips in your phone, Bluetooth, USB, radios, all that stuff. Those are the chips I'd help design in or manufacture. So I'm pretty deep technical nerd into that sort of stuff. I don't do that anymore because there's a shelf life to the knowledge of that. But I also started to realize that really the opportunities are more in building software and systems and platforms and sort of pulling everything together to solve a real problem. Semiconductors were only one piece of it. I mean, you can't have a phone without a radio, but you don't need a radio. Like those are piece parts. The phone is what really matters. It does a job for a person. It solves a problem, right? So I started to morph more into biotech and dabbled in that, and then started to really understand that the real value of being an entrepreneur and why I do it, because I had this gnawing feeling like, this job is so hard. Like the success is so low. Like people think I'm crazy that I don't have some corporate job at some big company that's all safe with salary and bonus and drinking bad corporate coffee. They're like, you're insane. Like, what exactly do you do? And so then I realized it's like, well, I really want to build an independent life that completes me, where I can create things that hopefully someone will actually use, right? Which I think every entrepreneur wants to do. In their heart, they see the status quo and they're like, yeah, this isn't right. Something's not right in the world. So I I really, bouncing around from, 6 different startups, really just spending my career just trying to find that one, scratch the itch of the creativity and the entrepreneur spirit, and boiled it down to the entrepreneur ethos, which I wrote the book about in 2017, and which my podcast is based on, the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast. And it's just been this great, I don't know, journey, zig and zag down life of really exploring what it really means to be an entrepreneur, why everyone does it, what's the purpose of it all, what does society need people like us, right? Like, how do you go from what Peter Thiel calls 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 10, right? Like, oh, I invented something, now what? Like, does anyone care?
Absolutely.
you know
Just
if
sent
an
him an
app
email today. I don't think he'll respond, but I sent him the email.
Well, this is funny because it's like, if an app's in the app store and no one downloads it, is it really an app in the app store? Like
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
metaphorical tree dropping in the wood and no one hears it. So, it's just been this super like weird, I wouldn't call it a, long, strange trip, but but really just kind of almost beat bopping around and trying to find like, okay, what's my gift to the world? And I finally, I'm almost 50, I finally figured out, oh, well, my gift to the world is to help other people and help this community grow, help the entrepreneur community understand that in order to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient world, which is what the ultimate goal, in my opinion, of an entrepreneur is, to bring products and services into the world that help humanity. We need to have an ethos. We need to have a higher standard for which we adhere to. And that goes beyond, is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it the right thing for our communities? Is it the right thing for the world to do? And so, this big idea I had, like, oh, the ethos, da, 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 right? And then I realized that that's a pretty hefty, lofty, cerebral type thing, and which is good. Like, you got to have a goal. But then I also would write these other books, these like how-to books, like 8 Startup Dilemmas, all founders will face, or 7 PR Secrets all founders should know, which is based on my late wife's work. So it's this sort of combination of, practical yet philosophical yet, big idea, aspirational goals. Because I think most entrepreneurs, if you dig down deep, one, we're probably all unemployable. I think, like, yeah,
I know that all too well.
right? We're unemployable. But two, deep down, I think we just really want to make a difference. And, if we're successful along the way, we get a little money, that's great. But I know most people that do this job, they almost,
the money comes last.
Yeah, the money comes last, and a lot of them do kind of do it for free anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's the craziest part, when you're really like building a team from the ground up. Like, it's just you as a solo founder, and you're finding people to come on. Like, the only red flag often is people that, they're like, I can't wait to make all this money. We're going to be these big stars having all these big cars. I'm like, okay, there's a possibility, but if you're not passionate about serving that, customer, that end consumer, and you're not passionate about, kind of doing it for free, because we're going to need to collect data points and stuff like that, and you might not be the person for the job. It's all about adding value to that end consumer and being obsessed about that, because we want to be the best, depending on what industry you're in. That's always a common goal,
Yeah.
So that's
No,
beautiful what you just said.
So, well, yeah, thank you. And so true, I mean, and as my, career, if you could call it a career, I think it's more of a lifestyle, vocation, obsession, borderline crazy, big, crazy, audacious stuff. What I found is that a lot of times, when you're inventing something, like, some of the biggest roadblocks are within you. The first thing is within you. Hey, is this really a good idea? I mean, who am I? Like, the whole issue of being an imposter. Like, who am I to think that this is good, right? And then you work through it, and you scratch your own itch, and you feel all these things, right? And then you sort of overcome the, okay, yeah, I think I'm onto something, right? And you convince your mom and your grandma and your friends and family, and you're like, hey, it's so cool. Like, look at this thing. Then you're like, okay, well, now you've convinced yourself. That's the first step. Second step is, now you've convinced other people. If you can't convince other people that love you that's a good idea, chances are it's a bad idea. Even
test.
right? Even your grandmother, right? Explain it to your grandmother, and she's like, oh, that's nice, honey. Yeah, I don't understand. Well, whatever. The mom test as well.
Absolutely.
So then, now you've got this thing, and it may be half baked. It may be a minimum viable product. It may even just be an idea. How do you then validate that? Like, how do you, like, go from what Peter Thiel calls the 0 to 1, right? Like, oh, well, I have nothing to something. Well, the question is, what something do you need to build in order to validate that the something that you have, your idea, actually someone will put money down for? Because for me, I've learned this the hard way. So this is like, that's why there's gray in the beard, pretty much. If someone's not going to pay for it, then it's not a product.
That's right.
You can do free pilots. You can do, free onboarding, free tier. But the whole goal is for someone to actually put their hard-earned money down and validate, I need this to do a job that I have, a problem, a challenge, or whatever. That I think is the biggest roadblock from the 0 to 1 and the 1 to scale, right? Like everyone has the vanity metric of, oh, I've got this huge mail list. Oh, people signed up for my free tier. Oh, look at how many people downloaded the app. And that's all great. And that's, I think,
Vanity
a
metrics,
signal.
like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's a signal, right? And don't get me wrong, that's a good signal. If no one did that, then okay, then it's even worse. But the ultimate signal, especially for an entrepreneur, is did someone buy it?
absolutely.
And
And
and we have to get over. I mean, and a lot of us, and me, and again, me included, for the last 25 years I've been doing this. I just learned this the last year or two. Ultimate market validation happens when you find customers that will pay for what you're offering. And it sounds crass, and it sounds like, oh, well, man, we just got to build at scale. Yeah, maybe 10 years ago, but that's not the way it works now. And you're going to waste a lot of time and effort if you can't get past the roadblock of people have to pay, right?
absolutely. Customer discovery and customer validation, popularized by Steve Blank, inspired
Yeah.
customerdiscovery.co, Customer
Yeah.
Discovercast.
Yeah.
And you are speaking my language. I'm so grateful I started this podcast because like I'm speaking to my people, for
Yeah.
probably the first time. I feel like I'm, one of you guys,
Yeah.
like this is how we think. We think in iterative approaches, like we're going to fail our way forward. We're not going to accomplish everything we want to, but we're going to collect data points that help us get to where we want to be.
Yeah.
And, the funny thing is these listeners may think that we spoke about, the business I own here. We haven't talked about, my business too much. I don't know if you did research. I don't know, but you really like hit the nail on the head. Like we take people from ideas through the four steps of customer discovery. These early stage founders may not even have a product, and we help them validate the market, and we
Yeah.
help them perform user research interviews to make sure that their
Yeah.
MVP is on the right track. So thank you for hitting on that. And I
No,
actually
yeah, no
asked you,
problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, building on that was kind of a segue. In your experience, you've worked for 6 different startups. What has been your biggest roadblock when it comes to that? You have this bright idea. You want to turn it into something real that impacts millions of lives. What was the hardest part?
I mean, it's finding the offering and the product market fit, like really the customers that are going to pay for it. I mean, and it's the hardest job. Like the hardest job in a startup is getting someone to buy your product. I think in any business, sales and marketing, or especially for technology companies, they kind of poo-poo it. They're like, oh yeah, those guys, whatever they do, we'll just, we'll hire a sales firm or sales pro on whatever, and we'll growth hack it, right? That sort of degrades the art and skill of selling, marketing, and PR and storytelling. Because if you're some technical person, you build some newfangled thing, the hardest part is, one, telling those technical people that their thing is not as good as they think it is, because they like really don't like to hear that. And that's from experience, since I used to build stuff like that. So I'm with you, right? Like I'll throw down on the tech cred any day. But it's the symbiotic relationship between what's good enough. Like if you left it to an engineer, they would polish the turd until you ran out of money and are dead in the ground for a decade. They
So
just
we
will
get buried
never,
with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
they never release stuff, right? And again, I've done this before because I used to be that guy building that stuff, and I did not want to release it because I was worried it's not perfect. They're going to find a bug, especially with hardware, right? Hardware and chips, it's a whole thing. But there's a point where we used to say, shoot the engineer and release it, because how am I going to know if it's even any good?
Right.
It needs to go out in the wild and find some traction. So the biggest roadblock I've found is what's good enough. What's good enough to validate the market? And that's like, is it an MVP? Is it an MVP plus? What's in the MVP? Is it an iterative approach? Is it have to talk to 100 customers and get 50 to buy or 20 to buy? We got to get, 1,000 people to sign up for the email list. Like, what's good enough? And whew, that is a lot of gray hair, a lot of yelling and screaming, and, in a good way. But I think that's the biggest roadblock to any startup, especially at the early stage.
Absolutely. And, building on that, talk about what, in your opinion, are kind of the eight, you don't have to spoil your book. You don't have to go super in depth, but I do want you to give us a little synopsis, tell us what are the eight main startup dilemmas that founders face, this is kind
Yeah.
of, looking ahead in my
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I have
Yeah.
to look out for?
So I, I had these dilemmas, um, and they're, I mean, they're in rough order of when they happen, but uh, I wanted to write this down because I would mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of young entrepreneurs. I was actually in this thing called 500 Startups, which was an accelerator.
Oh, I know exactly what
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
like trying to introduce YC you're doing right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're
So
like,
yeah,
oh, it's this
I was
little
in this
startup
little thing
accelerator.
called
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think I still got I don't know if you can see the
Up a little bit
B14.
higher. There we go.
Yeah,
Oh, what? Man,
that's
that's
my
awesome.
hoodie. This is my comfort hoodie, even though it was like 4 years ago we were in it, but I'm like,
Yeah.
almost 5 years now. But like, this
But
is
no,
my,
I cut you off. Please do introduce 500 starters
yeah,
because there's
sure,
definitely
sure.
people that don't know what it is.
Yeah. So 500 Startups is an accelerator based in San Francisco. It's a tier one equivalent to Y Combinator, to Techstars, at least in my opinion. I'm sure Y Combinator would be a little bit, like, no, we're the best. Yeah, but
Yeah,
so
of course.
but the thesis for 500 Startups was, if you're an investor, you need to invest early in lots of startups because of just the way startups work. It's a numbers game. And
Mhm.
so what they wanted to do was find these startups and then accelerate their growth to try to get them to get over the edge. Or they've already, they did the 0 to 1, they have something, but they needed to get to 1 to 10, and one to
Crossing the
10 is,
chasm, right?
yeah, crossing the chasm. What's the growth? Like, they wanted the hockey stick. And
Mhm.
so they would bet a bunch of all these companies. We'd go to this batch, we'd be in this cohort, and we would literally just learn how to growth hack and, like, okay, what are the metrics that matter? How are you growing your company? They would teach us all this stuff. And then the culmination of it would be this pitch day. And we would pitch to investors. And so it was to accelerate your momentum.
Mhm.
Um,
Accelerate. Yep.
yeah, that's why it's called an accelerator. That's why Combinator is an accelerator. Techstars is an accelerator. There was another one we went to called Launchpad Digital Health, which is also an accelerator. So
Mhm.
the the thing that I would always get asked, like, I was one of the older guys because I'd been around the block, is they'd ask me, so what are some of these things I'm going to run into? How do I navigate some of this stuff? And so the first one when you're starting a company is, do you do it solo or do you have a team, right? Then there's a bunch of other things. Right now, it's a lot easier to do the make versus buy. Do I write the code or do I do no code, right?
Mhm.
Do I get investors or do I bootstrap it? There's a time when bootstrapping makes sense. There's a time when investors make sense. Do I niche down or do I go mainstream? Do I have a free product or a paid product or a freemium product, right? Do I gain traction in the old school or do I go for sales, new school, right? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a combination of both? Is it a hybrid? Because sometimes, if you have a product, let's say it's a gadget, well, the service may be tracking the monitoring, the monthly fee. Do I offer a lease? Like right now, everyone's doing these subscription things where you can buy a watch, $1,000 watch, and you pay every month, some incremental thing, right? Do I stick with the idea or do I pivot? And that's a hard one, right? Like, pivoting from an idea is a surprising but inevitable result of every startup.
Mhm. They
The,
say
the,
there's this commonly thrown around saying where it's, no business plan survives the first interviews. And that was so true. We had to pivot right away.
Yeah, yeah, or more, yeah. And then there's a one in the analogy for military is no plan survives first contact with the enemy,
Yep. And then
or the
we could
first
boil that
shots.
down. Yeah. And then Mike
Yeah,
Tyson getting punched in the
yeah,
face.
exactly.
Where's your
Yeah,
plan?
everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and it's
Exactly.
100% true. And that's the reason why it's so important that you get something and you go test it out, especially now. I mean, it used to be back in the day, back in the Mad Men, Don Draper, glory days of Procter and Gamble and Ford and Chrysler. I mean, all like they would just make stuff up and then they would just feed the masses with this stuff, right? Like like if you had money and scale and you had some smarts, don't get me wrong, the ad guys were good guys, you know,
Yeah.
the Joe Sugarmans of the world and the Ogilvies, like they did it. But the success was, I wouldn't say it was assured, but the probability was super high because people were just starving for this stuff.
And advertisement was so new to them that they were like, "Oh wow!" And they were
Yeah.
so good with like selling the lifestyle behind the products. I remember watching
Yeah.
Mad Men, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Wow!"
Yeah. Yeah.
Nowadays, we see an ad, and it's so good. Again, it's like the second wave because now people create like a mini TV show in a commercial. I'd never watched TV, but I was watching commercials. I was watching football, watching the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's go Eagles! And I was seeing these commercials. I was like, TV has changed so much since I was a
Yeah.
kid because I really don't watch TV anymore.
Yeah.
And the commercials I like them now. It's like Super Bowl commercials every time you watch. So
Yeah.
it's
And there's a
intense.
reason for that because your attention span's getting lower and
Mhm.
you have to get there's this attention economy, which, Andy Grove, the Intel CEO said, we're competing for eyeballs and that's just only morphing into now we're competing not only for eyeballs but for attention,
Mhm.
limited attention. And look at all the stuff that's out there. Look at all the noise and the static, right? Like like this past, we're recording this after Black Friday, Cyber Monday. I mean, I don't know about you, but every brand I've ever given my email address to inundated me with these so many things. And I'm like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
really? And the ones,
It's
you
remarkable
know,
how much they know about us, We like the Target, what was it? Target, which could predict that, one of their customers was pregnant before she knew she was pregnant based on her purchase behavior. She was getting
it's,
ads for like kids clothing and stuff like that. I'm like,
yeah,
that's next level stuff right there.
yeah, that's all that AI stuff. And so yeah, so you got original pivot. How do you do that? Again, a little bit easier back in the day, and then now but back in the day, what was hard was building stuff. Now it's easy to build stuff. In fact, it's reversed. Easier to build stuff than to sell and market stuff because of everything that's out there. Anyone, you and I, if we had an idea with a very little money, could put up a website, run some ads, and see what happens. I mean, really low amount of money, not nothing,
Yeah, like $5 a
not
day. Quick
or
MVP
whatever.
does that. Have you
Yeah,
heard of that? Quick MVP?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have, yeah. So, which is really cool. So now you're like, okay, I got to get the signal, right? So,
Hmm.
because the signal is going to determine do I pivot or do I keep with my original idea?
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
I've
then
never used Quick MVP. I don't know if you've tried it, but I've heard
no, I
nothing
haven't.
but good things. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard good
I
things.
haven't. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a cool thing because again, like why work on an idea? This is the discipline part of being an entrepreneur. Why work on an idea that no one's going to buy?
Exactly. Yeah, and they make it so simple. They were bought out by a bigger company. It's such a simple idea. If you haven't seen it or listeners haven't heard of it, Quick MVP, you type in what your idea is and you create a little bit of copy that they automatically create a landing page for you. And then you set your budget. And based on whatever industry it's in, say it's software as a service for entrepreneurs, I'm pretty sure they have like a recommended, target you select. And then you run these Google ads for $5 a day, $10 a day, and they have like an analytics system built in. So you run these ads and then it returns like kind of a pass or fail experiment, like whether you need to pivot or persevere. And I need to try it because I've heard great things, but I mean, it's pretty cool. That's the next level stuff now. You could try it without ever writing a single line of
Yeah,
code.
yeah, and pretty cool, right? And so the world is going to collapse into that. So it's going to be easier to make, harder to sell. Whereas before it was hard to make, easier to sell.
Absolutely.
And then the last one is, do I continue on with a beta, or do I like 1.0 it, as software people like to say? And what does that mean? Well, there's a certain point we just got to lock it in and try to launch it. And so that's sort of the 8 in a nutshell. And again, it's based on my experience of my friends, some research. It's a small little book. It's like, it was originally, I think, a blog series or something. I don't remember, but really powerful to think about that, because all entrepreneurs go through these dilemmas. Just like all entrepreneurs, there are certain traits, values, and beliefs that we all adhere to, we all want to get better at. And not to say that everyone's the same, but if you talk to enough entrepreneurs like I do, through the podcast, I mean, that's all about talking with entrepreneurs. It's like these themes emerge. these like, yeah, you're speaking to me, bro.
Yeah,
And it's like,
exactly.
oh wow, I
Here I
can't
am.
believe, here I
Yeah.
am. Like, God, man, I found my tribe, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
If we could have all gone to school together, you know what I mean, with a
it'd have been
curriculum
nuts.
relevant. Oh
It'd have
man.
been insane. I think most of us would be. I mean, I think all of us have got, to a certain degree, attention deficit disorder, and like,
Half of
um,
Rome would have been built in a day, and then
oh
we
yeah,
could move
like
on
half a
to
day.
the
Would it
next.
be
Yeah.
like, why, MVP, half a day, Rome,
Yeah.
rest of the,
On to the next one.
yeah, on to the
we
next
can't
one.
focus on that for too long. On to the
Yeah,
next one.
come on, guys. Let's get 1.0, get on to the next one. We need the next one. So,
So
but
yeah, I mean, that's a ton of great, like, tangible advice that someone can take away in terms of, whether they own a startup right now, they can kind of, factor in what phase they're in and what's the next roadblock to encounter. But in terms of more, a bigger picture, holistic picture, if you will, like improving entrepreneurship as, I don't want to say, it kind of is, as a culture. It really is. It's a certain lifestyle. You wrote Entrepreneur
mhm.
Ethos to address a certain aspect of it, and I can kind of relate. A lot of people think it's, you're wearing a suit, you're in a flashy car, you're doing all that. Oftentimes you're sleeping on a air mattress, in a studio. It depends. It's very,
Eating top ramen.
yeah, honestly, you're eating shit until you get to the top. Like, that's
Right,
pretty much it
right.
if you're doing things the right way. So
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit. What's your philosophy on that?
Yeah. So, wrote the Entrepreneur Ethos, inspired by my late wife, Jane, who was an entrepreneur. She passed away 3.5 years ago from leukemia. And when we first met, she was a PR and marketing entrepreneur in the sports space. So you're a sports fan. So she worked with, Yao Ming, Amari Sotomayor, Carmelo Anthony, Marshawn Lynch, JT Snow, the list goes on and on. And so, as a female Asian publicist in a male dominated industry, it's probably, I wouldn't say it's the worst of the worst when it comes to sexism and racism, but it's probably pretty close. It's like Mad Men on steroids in some
Mm.
cases, right?
A lot more testosterone, probably, if you think about it.
Yeah, and it depends on the sport too. Like,
Right.
different sports have different attitudes and stuff, and generally, like, she would try to work with some of the, and all those people I mentioned are really great people, and we're trying
Mhm.
to do really really good work. But she would tell me these challenges and struggles, and of course, since I'm a tall white guy with a beard, get mad at me for like, yo, you white guys rule the world, and like, look, okay, I see your point, and you have a valid point, but it's hard for everyone, but it's a little easier for us because most entrepreneurs and investors look like us, right? Or look like me. So this was around the time of like the Me Too movement. And a lot of this stuff was coming to light, especially in startups. And I'm in Silicon Valley, right? And so
Mhm.
I had been writing this book and talking to people, and literally, the book came out in October of 2017, which was almost like the escalation of the Me Too movement and all of this stuff. So uh, I had really wanted to put forth an ethos where those that are in the community can like aspire to do better. Because I realized that one, this is a hard job. If you even call it a job, it's a hard vocation, a hard calling. Two, since it is so hard, we all got to take care of each other and we actually have to help each other. And the entrepreneurs that I know, they'll stand on top of a mountaintop screaming that they need help, right? But the problem is that not a lot of the people that don't look like me had access to that kind of mentorship and that kind of training. I mean, it's not as accessible
Yeah.
to other people, right? And so I'm like, well, okay, why don't I start writing this stuff down? That's why I write the books. But I wanted to put forth and it's almost a challenge to myself, to be honest. Like, I aspire to be this way, and if someone says, what do you stand for? I said, well, I wrote this book. This is what I stand for. I'm trying to be the change I want to see. I'm trying to make the world better. And this is how I want to do it. And once you put that down in a book and start talking about it, there's this chain reaction, right? Because let's say you're in a minority group and you're just, like you're at the top of your lungs screaming about the injustice and all the things that are absolutely 100% valid. I mean, you have a point and you've convinced everyone in your group that you have a point because everyone has been feeling the same thing, right? So it's not a question of convincing your group. It's a question of convincing the majority or the group that's quote unquote oppressing you, because you have to convince them in order for things to change. That's the way it's always been. Martin Luther King understood that. Even to a certain degree, the Black Lives Matter movement understood that. They still understand that. And they're still like, these movements are like, got to convince the majority, not the minority. So that's a powerful thing, because once the majority understands, then everyone can do something about it. So I said, okay, well, I'm in the majority. I need to start talking about this. I need to start saying we need to do better, and this is how we need to do better. And
You
that
know,
is actually, that's rippled through to what I do now. I help professional athletes with their foundations to help kids learn entrepreneurship through a thing called Founders Camp,
mhm.
and trying to bring this lifestyle, attitude, training, vocation, calling to as many people as possible. Because again, anyone can do this. It doesn't matter who you are. You could live anywhere in the world. You could be anyone, and you can be an entrepreneur. It doesn't take any special skills. You just need to get trained to know how to do it. So
Yeah. I mean, I have two main, well, I have a lot to say about that, but two main points. Like, one, what you just finished on, I'll start on that so I don't forget. I was in YC's startup school this past
mm-hmm.
Thursday, and we had a group session. Every week you have a group session. And this was the first time that it was anyone outside of the States, right? Normally it's people in California or New York or like, East Coast or West Coast. That tends to be like the hubs of entrepreneurship.
Right.
And this time, actually, oddly enough, there was actually two entrepreneurs that were both from Africa. One was from Nigeria, and I can't pronounce the other country that they were from within Africa. And they were talking about how competition is so high in Africa because as soon as someone reads about something in the news in the United States, they then want to bring it to Africa. So it's like it's almost like the competitive edge is being able to read the news faster, and how do you do that? So that almost seems like a bridge for entrepreneurship right there, like accelerating the access to news. But their businesses were both very unique. One was in the oil and gas industry, one was in basically HR, if you will, like
Mm-hmm.
letting employees basically get money from their employers based on some kind of criteria. I forgot what it was, but um, it's kind of commonplace within organizations here, like a payment
Yeah.
incentive versus profit sharing, basically.
Yeah. Profit sharing. Yeah.
But they were talking about like, how do I find a co-founder in America? How do I do this? Because someone hears my accent, and the moment they hear that, it's kind of it's over for me. And I was like, man, there's X, Y, and Z resources, but who's to say they won't run into those same issues? you know, whether it's on various platforms or, social media.
Yeah.
And it's tough because, there's many American entrepreneurs we talked about on my last podcast. There was a fellow social entrepreneur as well, a group of kids at MIT wanted to help develop Africa with solar panels, and they created microtransactions, and then individual people could sell back their power to the grid, really empowering those communities. And there's a big move to do that. I think even Mark Zuckerberg, they installed like some kind of like mass internet in Africa. You might know more about that as well, but I think it's becoming more commonplace. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Africa as an example has been exploited for all of time. None of really the natural resources have really been put back into the people of Africa. It's starting to change now because everyone's realizing that's the last great frontier to develop. It's the last big market. I mean, China, okay, India, but like Africa is this untapped resource that's been tapped, natural resources for forever and been exploited, and all the bad stuff that's been happening. But then when it comes to this internet, SaaS, like products and services that are for the region that are ubiquitous here, they're just starting to touch the surface over there. And because of the access to the internet and all this news and all this thing, and you start to see more democracy and more structures in place that have been eliminated. Colonialism's going away, and there's like stability. Well, it's just going to explode because with growth, because everyone there is like, again, like just as smart as us, just as driven, just as they just, I mean, you see it. I mean, you even see it even in some of the just what we would call low tech solutions to problems, and just basic, like even the basic, once they have the basic infrastructure of clean water,
Yeah.
mosquito nets, which, just boggles your mind. You're like, more people die of malaria there, I mean, than
Absolutely.
anywhere, right? You're like, really? Like, we can't solve this? So I think what will happen as time goes on, and you'll see it, and there's a lot of people heavily investing in Africa, not exploiting Africa, although I'm sure there are people doing that. But the momentum's happening. And when I was at 500 Startups, there were a bunch of African entrepreneurs there as well.
Yeah.
They just started doing a fund where they were going to target, Latin America and Africa, and they brought them over. And it was just, I mean, inspiring and mind-boggling, what these guys were doing. And they're just sitting there. I remember talking to one of them. They're just like soaking this up like a sponge. They're like, I can't believe how many, we had 35 companies in my batch. And they're just like, I cannot believe how much energy in the room. Like, every single person here could be a unicorn. Who's going to be the unicorn, right?
Yeah.
And is amazing. In fact, some of them in my batch I mean, I think, I don't know how many of them are unicorns, but, or at least on the path. It's just incredible. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I was watching Mark Zuckerberg. I'm a big fan of, like, just his ability to learn through. They say move fast and break things.
mhm,
And he was
mhm.
talking to a representative of the YC school about the fact that, this was in 2017. Still 50% of the world don't have access to internet.
Yeah,
And they're like, how do we fix that? That's why he did, he
yeah.
basically made an initiative to help out Africa with internet. But yeah, it's just interesting to see, like, how quickly would innovation occur, because then you factor in like the whole world pays attention to American news, and it really becomes kind of like a brand, and it becomes exciting. I could speak firsthand. I'm not from this country, but when I moved here, I went to New York. I was like, I always want to live there. I always wanted
Where are
to.
you from?
I'm in Virginia, but I actually moved up to New York in 2019, and I loved it, man. I lived in Times Square. And
Mhm,
then COVID hit, so I was laid off from my job. Hence why I
mm,
started my business, moved back to Virginia.
right.
But you really realize how powerful America is with two
Mhm.
countries, and then once they have access to the same resources as us, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it actually doesn't take much resource. That's the thing that you sometimes shake your head, especially even like inner city, traditionally impoverished, cycle of poverty communities where which I go to occasionally, and bring people together to kind of teach entrepreneurship. And you sit down and you look at these kids, and usually they're middle school to high school kids. And they're from like, the areas they're from are not too great. Poverty, generational poverty, violence, crime, very low resources. Like, it ain't cool, right? And this is in America, and literally 10 miles away is some McMansion massive thing, right? And I remember I was doing one of these seminars in Memphis, Tennessee, and there are these kids, and like, you just see, I mean, I get choked up a little bit because you see the spark, and it's hard to explain. But when you're like helping a kid out, like trying to learn, and like they're just soaking this up so quick, and they're like, wow, someone's spending the time to teach me this. And it's not just me, like we bring all these entrepreneurs together that look like them, that are in the community. Like, these are the ones that have quote unquote made it. And then you kind of see the spark, and you look at this kid. I remember looking at this middle school kid. He's a small little middle school kid, and he's pitching this medical device that is like, he literally just learned it the day before. And it's a complicated medical device on how to suture your knee for knee surgery. I mean, really complex. And I'm looking at this kid, right? And I'm like, that could have been me. That I could have been born him.
Yeah.
And it's an absolute luck of the draw that I was born white in Silicon Valley.
Oh,
And
so you were born and raised in Silicon Valley as well.
I grew up in Silicon Valley, born and raised here. So, and when you realize that is the majority, like when you just really sit down and say, that could have been me. And if that was me, what would I want someone like me to do? Or what would I want the majority to do? Or what, like, especially entrepreneurship and opportunity. And, really it's all about opportunity and taking advantage of opportunity and, I'm being lucky, right? A little bit of luck. Then you start to really think, you're like,
what should I do?
What should I do?
Yeah.
How can I be not only the change I want to see, and not only how can I make other communities prosper? Not just that they matter, everyone matters, not just that, so happens to be, the as one of my players says, like, the reason why Black Lives Matter is because that's the house that's burning down now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's it. Like, it's on fire. Like, we got to put the fire out. But then you realize, oh, well, it's beyond that. How do we make communities that prosper? Because prosperity and opportunity is what entrepreneurship is supposed to be about. And anyone can do it. And when you see kids that think that the only option they have is professional sports, crime, or drug dealing or whatever, or mediocre jobs, or not even being able to go to college. And when they get inspired to be like, what, I could do this.
Yeah, your environment matters. I remember as a kid, in Trinidad, and I went to it was a small island, which is now considered a third world country. It didn't feel like that. I was kind of blessed when I was there, but still, I remember one of my friends, like, they asked him, we were in school, they were like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, a thief. I wanted to be a thief. We had accents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is a thief, right? That's what you're wondering, right? It's a thief. He couldn't say the word thief, but that was his goal. He wanted to be a thief when he grew up, because in his community, that's who was really making money. So it was really interesting. But honestly, that's been something that I've always thought of. Like, I even priced out how much it costs to build a school in Africa. Is $12,000. It's not really that expensive if you think about it. But like, what do you do? Say it's a certain place in America. What do? Do you just throw money at it? No, you have to empower kids with knowledge. And that's really what gives them the tools that, they can then see, that graph where it's kind of like someone's just looking at a brick wall, then someone's standing on money. I think it is. They can see slightly, above it. And then they're standing on books. They can see everything. And I'm a firm believer in that. When you see what's possible, even if it's not immediately around you, you can see it in your brain. You can make it come true.
Yeah. I mean, all the players that that Jane worked with, and now that I work with, is sort of my, PR and marketing firm. Like my side hustle became my real hustle, which is a long story,
That's
or
a goal right there. That's awesome.
a different story.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the goal and when I've been around all these professional athletes, typically they come from communities that are underserved, that are full of poverty and violence. They've been left behind, quote unquote, which is true. And these have been marginalized communities for a long time. Generational poverty, violence. People have given up on them. And in some cases, they've given up on themselves, which is sad because when these kids see the possibility, it's the opportunities that they need. No, I can't stress this enough that everyone can do the entrepreneur job, hands down. You don't have to be that quote unquote bright. In fact, people that are book smart probably wouldn't do very well at being an entrepreneur, because it's a lot of vocational, blue collar, it's the blue collar work ethic, which is just so powerful. And something that I'm a little sad that people don't respect that blue collar work ethic. It's just as entrepreneurial to own a plumbing business that does stuff as it is to have a SaaS company. So again,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and it's all about opportunity, but also they have to be able to take advantage of the opportunity through education and mentorship. And it's funny because when you talk with a lot of minority entrepreneurs, they typically are like, when they get a little frustrated, which I granted, I give it this, they're like, we don't need mentors, we need money, right? They need investment and they need the opportunity, right? And I think that's the thing that even a lot of the players that I work with are trying to do through investing in technology and trying to understand that cycle, that virtuous cycle of investing in the community, but also investing in entrepreneurs that look like them. And they always people have this argument like the best candidate for the job gets it, or there's a standard or whatever. And that's just kind of, I just don't really adhere to that. I think as soon as you hit a certain standard, like when your skills are above a certain level, it's a crapshoot. And you see that with the ultimate thing is you see that with entrepreneurs and you see that with companies.
Yeah.
Like,
They call it
a lot of
meritocracy instead of
well,
meritocracy and doing the work. It's kind of like, can I see
yeah,
myself in you,
yeah. But being even like venture capitalists will be the first to tell you that they get lucky. It's a lot of luck, and they're very keen on trends, but they can't tell you which of their companies is going to be successful. I have no idea. And anyone that says they do is lying. I mean, Airbnb just went public 2 days ago, worth $100 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
They were rejected so much by mainstream VCs. It's like the rejection emails are going around on Twitter, and it's laughable, right? Because people are like, you'll go nowhere. Well, I think it was Sequoia Capital, one
Oh,
of the
yeah.
big ones. Yeah, one of the big ones, right?
Yeah. Sequoia NYC.
Right. The reason why Sequoia invested in those guys wasn't necessarily because they believed in Airbnb as oh, you're going to do this. What happened was they actually were selling these Obama O's and McCain cereal things that they cooked up to float their company.
Yeah.
And they showed it to the guy at Sequoia, and he's like, "You mean you're selling these?" Yeah, we sold them. And then the YC guy was the same way. I think it was, I don't remember the guy at YC that kind of funded them, but he saw that it wasn't necessarily the idea, but it was the team that was going to execute the idea, and realizing, you know what? I think whatever these guys do is going to be successful. But no one knew they were going to be, no one knew. Let me look at then COVID hits. 80% of their revenue goes away, just poof.
Yep.
Uber's same way, right? Poof. Who knows who's going to win? But you got to be able to get on, shots on goal. You got to be able to get at bat, man. And that's, I think, the thing that's lacking in these communities. They need to have the opportunity.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. And Airbnb, I believe it's two co-founders. I remember reading about that, the political serial campaign, but
Yeah.
even before that, before they started Airbnb, they literally like went that they booked either a like an empty house, and they said we're not going to leave here until we have a working idea that we can go out and test. And they, ran through a bunch of different ideas, tested them, nothing
Yep.
passed, and then they finally got to Airbnb, and they're like, okay, we're going to pursue this. And
Yeah.
they went ahead and tested it, but they had no idea, and they just
No,
brainstormed and ran with it, and now they have a
no
billion
idea.
dollar company.
Yeah. 100 billion dollar
100 billion,
company.
yeah. Let me not miss the other 99. That's kind of important.
Yeah, like the two orders of magnitude that you just missed. But
Yeah.
I mean, again, they got lucky.
Yeah,
They worked hard and they hit the market right, but they got lucky. Could have all fallen apart.
absolutely. Absolutely. But hey, man, it's been great today. What I want to basically ask you is, how can the audience get in touch with you? How can they keep up with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at the Daily MBA, which is my blog, thedailymba.com. You can also look up the entrepreneurethos.com. That's where I put all my podcast stuff. I'm on LinkedIn. My name's pretty easy to find. So it's like Jarie Bolander on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And
But
I'll
those are
attach all of your links in the
cool,
description
man.
as well.
Yeah, I
So
really appreciate that. Yes, I love, get in touch. You want to talk, entrepreneurship, listen to the show as well, Entrepreneur Ethos. I interview entrepreneurs all the time, and got to, we got to set that up so we can kind of I can interview you and figure out your story.
sounds good, man.
We'll
I mean, it's
figure
been a
that out.
pleasure getting to know you. It's
Yeah,
been
you
fun.
as well, man. You as well. Really, really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for having me on the show. It's important that we talk about these things, and yeah, for all of those people out there that are thinking, want to do a company, not sure if I can do it, what can I really do it? Yeah, yeah,
You
you
can.
can. You can.
I can't think of better parting words, man. Thank you so much. It has been an honor.
You as well. Thanks a lot. Stay safe.